You leave this house with exactly what you brought into it, absolutely nothing. That was the last thing Gabe said to his wife of 10 years before locking the door of their $5 million mansion. He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a dependent, helpless woman who would crumble without his credit cards. He was wrong. Gabe didn't know that the woman he just kicked to the curb wasn't just a housewife. She was the hidden heiress to a global empire, and her brother, the ruthlessly protective CEO of Sterling Industries, was about to turn Gabe's divorce court into a crime scene. You think you know revenge. You haven't seen anything yet. The rain in Seattle wasn't just rain. It was a relentless grey curtain that seemed to wash away all hope. Inside the sleek modern glass walls of the Vance estate, the atmosphere was even colder than the storm outside. Camelia Vance stood in the center of the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a cardboard box. It was a humiliatingly small box, an old Amazon shipping container she had fished out of the recycling bin in the garage. Inside were a few framed photographs, a ceramic dog she'd painted on their first date, and her mother's old tattered Bible. "Are you deaf, Camelia?" The voice boomed from the top of the floating staircase. Gabe Vance descended like a king coming down to scold a peasant. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way, impeccably dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes utterly devoid of warmth. "I said, hurry up," Gabe snapped, checking his platinum Rolex. "I have guests arriving at 7. I don't want you cluttering up the foyer." Camelia looked up at him. 10 years. She had given him 10 years of her life. She had nursed him through his first failed startup. She had managed the household, entertained his boring investors, and smoothed over his temper tantrums. She had been the invisible glue holding his life together. "Gabe," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "It's pouring outside. My car. You cancelled the insurance. I can't even drive it legally." Gabe laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Your car? That's my car, Camelia. The title is in the company name. Vantage Tech Property. And since you are no longer an employee or an asset to Vantage Tech, you don't get the perks. You can call an Uber or walk. I really don't care." He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to the side table, pouring himself a scotch. He took a sip, grimacing, as if her mere presence tainted the flavor. "Look, let's make this simple," Gabe said, turning to face her. He pulled a thick envelope from his inside jacket pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Sign that. It's a settlement waiver. You admit that you contributed nothing to the business you waive spousal support, and you agree to a clean break. In exchange, I won't sue you for the emotional distress of being a terrible wife." Camelia stared at the envelope. "You want me to leave with nothing after I used my inheritance from my grandmother to pay off your first business loan? That was $20,000, Gabe." "That was a gift," Gabe roared, his face suddenly red. "And that money is long gone, burned in the market. You have no proof, and even if you did, my lawyers, Goldman Sachs, and whatever team I hire will bury you in paperwork until you starve. Do you have $50,000 for a retainer? Camelia, no. You have... what a box of trash." He walked over and kicked the cardboard box at her feet. It slid across the polished marble floor. "You're pathetic," he sneered. "I need a woman who matches my status, someone with ambition, not a charity case I picked up at a library fundraiser." Just then, the front door buzzed. Gabe's face transformed instantly from a mask of rage to a welcoming smile. He strode past Camelia as if she were invisible and threw open the massive oak door. Standing there, shaking a wet umbrella, was Chloe. She was 23, a junior marketing executive at Gabe's firm, and she was wearing a coat that cost more than Camelia's entire wardrobe. "Baby!" Chloe squealed, jumping into Gabe's arms. She kissed him deeply, right there in the open doorway, oblivious or perhaps uncaring that Camelia was standing 10 feet away. When they pulled apart, Chloe looked over Gabe's shoulder. Her eyes widened in mock surprise. "Oh, she's still here. Just leaving," Gabe promised, stroking Chloe's hair. "She was just saying goodbye to the house." Chloe smirked, walking into the room and tossing her purse onto the sofa, Camelia's favorite spot. "Well, don't take too long. We're redecorating on Monday. I hate this beige. It's so depressing." Camelia felt a physical pain in her chest, a tightening that made it hard to breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the erasure. They were erasing her existence in real time. Camelia bent down and picked up her box. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a vase. She simply looked at Gabe one last time. "You're making a mistake, Gabe," she said softly. "The only mistake I made was marrying a nobody," he retorted, turning his back to pour Chloe a drink. "Leave the keys on the table, and don't scratch the floor on your way out." Camelia placed her house key on the marble console table. It clicked a final metallic period at the end of a long, painful sentence. She opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the deluge. The rain soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her face, chilling her to the bone. She didn't have an umbrella. She didn't have a car. She began to walk down the long, winding driveway of the estate, her shoes sloshing in the puddles. At the bottom of the hill just outside the iron gates that were now closing behind her, effectively locking her out, she found shelter under a bus stop awning. She set the wet box on the bench. She was shivering uncontrollably. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, another casualty of Gabe's temper from a week ago. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 4 years. It rang once, twice. "Hello." A deep, authoritative voice answered. It wasn't warm, but it was familiar. "Julian." Camelia's voice cracked. There was a silence on the other end. Then the tone of the voice shifted from corporate indifference to intense alertness. "Ellie, is that you?" He threw me out, Julian. He took everything. I'm at the bus stop on Highland Drive." "Stay there," the voice commanded. The authority in his tone was absolute, the kind of voice that moved markets and toppled governments. "Do not move. I am tracking your phone. I'm sending the jet to Boeing Field, but I'll have a car there in 10 minutes. Ellie." "Yes," she whispered, tears finally mixing with the rain on her face. "Is he still inside the house?" "Yes. With her." "Good," Julian said, and his voice dropped to a terrifyingly low register. "Let him get comfortable. Let him think he's won. I want him to feel safe before we burn his world down." For the next 3 months, Camelia lived a ghost life. To the outside world, and specifically to Gabe's private investigators, she was living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex in South Seattle. She took the bus. She was seen grocery shopping with coupons. She worked a shift at a local bookstore. Gabe Vance loved every report his lawyer, the notorious shark Alan Dershowitz wannabe, named Silas Thorne, sent him. "She's breaking Gabe," Silas said, over a speakerphone lunch in Gabe's high-rise office. "We checked her accounts. She's got less than $500. She hasn't hired counsel yet. She's likely going to default on the divorce filing, and you'll get a summary judgment." Gabe swirled his cognac, looking out over the city skyline. "I told you, she's nothing without me. She's probably waiting for me to come rescue her." "Well, don't," Silas chuckled. "The court date for the asset division is set for November 15th. If she shows up, she'll have a public defender who won't know a balance sheet from a takeout menu. We'll hide the offshore accounts in the Caymans, undervalue Vantage Tech by 60%, and claim your debt outweighs your assets. You'll walk away clean." "Perfect," Gabe grinned. "And Chloe wants a wedding in Tuscany next spring. Make sure the divorce is finalized by then." But Gabe wasn't looking closely enough. If he had looked closer at the run-down apartment complex where Camelia lived, he might have noticed that the black SUV, parked down the street 24/7, had tinted windows and 2 ex-Mossad agents inside. If he had looked closer at the bookstore where she worked, he would have realized it was a subsidiary of a holding company owned by the Sterling Group. Camelia wasn't suffering. She was preparing. Inside the small apartment, the walls were covered in charts. Not conspiracy theories, but financial flows. Camelia sat at a folding table, a laptop open. On the screen was a video call. Her brother, Julian Sterling, filled the frame. He was sitting in the back of a Maybach in London, wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than Gabe's car. "We found the shell company, Ely," Julian said, rubbing his temples. "He's moving money through a fake consulting firm in Nevada called Vance Global Solutions. He funneled $3 million there last month, right before claiming poverty on his affidavit." Camelia wrote something down on a notepad. "He thinks he's so smart. He thinks because I let him handle the bills for 10 years, I don't understand math. He forgets you graduated summa cum laude from Wharton before you decided to play happy housewife," Julian growled. "I still don't understand why you did it, Elle. Why did you hide who we were? Why did you let him treat you like a beggar for a decade?" Camelia sighed, looking at the rain against the window. "Because of Dad, Julian. You saw what people did to him. They only loved him for the Sterling name. I wanted to be loved for me. I wanted to know that if I had nothing, the man I married would still stand by me. I told Gabe I was an orphan with debt because I wanted to be sure." "Well," Julian's voice hardened. "Now you're sure." "Yes, now I'm sure." "The forensic accounting team is ready," Julian said. "We have the bank records he thinks he deleted. We have the emails between him and Chloe mocking you. We have everything. But there's one problem." "What?" "The judge. It's Judge Harrison. He's old school. He plays golf with Gabe's father at the country club. He's known for favoring the primary earner in these cases. If we go in there with just paperwork, Harrison might bury it or seal the records to protect his buddy's son." Camelia's eyes narrowed. The sadness that had defined her for months evaporated, replaced by the cold steel resolve that ran in the Sterling bloodline. "Then we don't just use paperwork, Julian. We need a show. Gabe loves drama. He loves to humiliate people publicly. Fine. Let's give him an audience. What are you thinking? The hearing on the 15th. Gabe thinks I'm coming alone. He thinks I'm going to beg for a few $1,000s in alimony." Camelia paused, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "I want you to come." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You want me to fly to Seattle for a preliminary divorce hearing? I have a board meeting in Tokyo." "Cancel it," Camelia said. "I want you to walk into that courtroom. But not right away. I want you to wait until he lies. I want you to wait until he says under oath that I am a financial burden who contributed nothing. I want you to wait until he insults the Sterling name unknowingly." Julian leaned back in his leather seat, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He tapped his fingers together. "You want the Godfather entrance?" "Exactly," Camelia said. "And Julian?" "Yes. Bring the acquisition files, the ones for Vantage Tech." Julian laughed out loud. "Oh, this is going to be fun. Gabe has been trying to get a meeting with me for 5 years to sell his company to us. He has no idea his wife is the majority shareholder of the parent company. He's begging to buy him out." He told me to leave with nothing, Camelia whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. I'm going to make sure he leaves with nothing but the suit on his back. November 15th arrived with a biting chill. The King County Courthouse was a grey, imposing monolith of justice, teeming with lawyers, criminals, and shattered families. Gabe Vance arrived in style. He pulled up in his new Aston Martin, another purchase he'd hidden from the financial disclosures, and stepped out looking like he owned the sidewalk. Chloe was on his arm, dressed in a white suit that looked inappropriate for a divorce hearing, more suited for a bridal shower. Just keep your mouth shut and look pretty, Gabe whispered to her as they ascended the steps. Silas is going to mop the floor with her in 20 minutes. Then we go to lunch at Canlis to celebrate. I just want her gone, Mark, Chloe pouted. She's like a bad smell. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was stifling. Judge Harrison sat on the bench looking bored and irritable. He was a man who clearly preferred the golf course to domestic disputes. Gabe and his lawyer, Silas Thorne, took the table on the right. Silas spread out 3 massive binders of documents. They looked formidable. On the left side sat Camelia. She was alone. She wore a simple, slightly worn grey cardigan and black slacks. She had no binders, no briefcase, just a small notepad and a pencil. She looked small, defeated, and exactly how Gabe wanted her to look. Case number 49201, Vance versus Vance, the bailiff announced. Ready for the petitioner. Silas Thorne boomed, standing up and buttoning his $3,000 jacket. Ready, Camelia said softly. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses at Camelia. Mrs. Vance, where is your counsel? I am representing myself, Your Honor, Camelia said, her voice shaking just enough to sell the act. Gabe snorted audibly. Silas smirked. Your Honor, this is exactly what we expected. Mrs. Vance is... well, she's not sophisticated in these matters. We tried to offer a settlement to spare her this embarrassment, but she refused. I see. Judge Harrison sighed. Well, let's get on with it. I have a full docket. Mr. Thorne, present your motion. Silas Thorne walked to the center of the room, playing to the gallery, though there were only a few bored strangers in the back. Your Honor, the facts are simple. My client, Mr. Gabe Vance, is a self-made innovator in the tech sector. He built Vantage Tech from the ground up. Mrs. Vance, on the other hand, has been unemployed for the duration of the marriage. She has contributed 0 capital, 0 intellectual property, and 0 labor to the estate. In fact, she has been a significant drain on Mr. Vance's resources. Camelia wrote a single word on her notepad. Liar. We are asking, Silas continued, that the court uphold the validity of the financial separation. Mr. Vance's company is currently in a precarious position. The market is down, and he cannot afford alimony. We are offering Mrs. Vance a one-time payment of $5,000 to help with moving costs. Given that she brought nothing into the marriage, we feel this is generous. Judge Harrison nodded, looking at Gabe. Mr. Vance, you swear your financial affidavit is accurate. The company is struggling. Gabe stood up, putting on his best, humble genius face. Yes, Your Honor. It's been a brutal year. I've had to lay off staff. I've taken a pay cut myself. If I had to pay alimony, Vantage Tech would go under. I'm just trying to survive. Camelia stood up slowly. Your Honor, may I ask the petitioner a question? The judge rolled his eyes. Make it quick, Mrs. Vance. You're not a lawyer. Camelia turned to Gabe. She didn't look at Silas. She looked directly at the man she had loved. Gabe, she said, her voice strengthening. You say the company is failing. Yet didn't you just purchase a 2024 Aston Martin DB12 last week? License plate Vance 1. The room went silent. Gabe blinked. Silas stiffened. Objection, Silas shouted. "Relevance and hearsay. I have a photo of it in the courthouse parking lot, taken 10 minutes ago," Camelia said, pulling a printed photo from her pocket and placing it on the judge's bench. Judge Harrison looked at the photo, then at Gabe. "Mr. Vance. It's a company car, Your Honor," Gabe stammered. For client image. It's a lease, a tax write-off. And the trip to Cabo San Lucas 3 weeks ago." Camelia continued pulling out another paper. "The bill for the presidential suite at the Four Seasons, $12,000 a night. Was that for client image too? Or was that for Miss Chloe sitting right there?" Chloe gasped and shrank down in her seat. Gabe's face turned purple. "You were stalking me. I was auditing you," Camelia corrected. "Your Honor," Silas intervened, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. Mrs. Vance is clearly trying to smear my client to distract from the fact that she is a leech. She has no income, no family, no standing. She is looking for a handout." Silas turned to Camelia, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's be honest, Camelia. Who are you? You're nobody. You have no connections. You have no money. You're just angry that the free ride is over. You should take the $5,000 and thank Mr. Vance for his charity." Camelia looked down at the floor for a second. The courtroom was silent. Gabe was grinning, thinking Silas had crushed her. Then the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, echoing bang. Every head in the room turned. 2 men in dark suits with earpieces walked in first, scanning the room. They stood on either side of the door. Then a man walked in. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair, and a presence that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that made Gabe's clothes look like costumes. He carried a slim leather briefcase. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Gabe. He walked straight toward Camelia's table. Judge Harrison sat up straight, his eyes widening. He recognized the man. Everyone in the business world recognized the man. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Harrison asked, though his voice lacked its usual bite. The man stopped at the gate. He looked at the judge and smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. "Apologies, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and incredibly dangerous. "I hit traffic coming from the airfield. I am late for my appearance." "Your appearance?" the judge asked. "Who are you?" The man opened the gate and walked to Camelia's side. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, then turned to face Gabe, whose face had gone pale white. "I am retained counsel for Mrs. Vance." The man lied smoothly, though he was much more than that. "But more importantly, I am a material witness regarding the financial assets of Vantage Tech. Name for the record." The court stenographer asked, her fingers hovering over the keys. The man adjusted his cuffs. "My name is Julian Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global Industries. And," he looked at Gabe with eyes like ice, "I am Camelia's brother." The silence in courtroom 4B was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes an execution. Judge Harrison, a man who had spent 30 years on the bench and prided himself on being unshakable, took off his glasses and cleaned them as if trying to ensure he wasn't hallucinating. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his tone shifting from dismissive to deferential. I wasn't aware there was a relation." "Few people are," Julian said, walking through the gate. He didn't sit. He stood behind Camelia's chair, placing both hands on the backrest, looming over the court like a titan. "My sister values her privacy. She wanted to build a life based on merit, not her last name. Unfortunately, she married a man who values neither." Gabe Vance looked like he had swallowed a bag of gravel. He leaned over to Silas Thorne, his expensive lawyer. "Do something," he hissed. Who cares if he's her brother? That doesn't change the prenup. That doesn't change the company finances. Silas, sweating slightly, stood up. Your Honor, while it is fascinating to learn of Mrs. Vance's maiden name, it is legally irrelevant. Mr. Sterling has no standing in this divorce case. Unless he is a party to the marriage, he needs to sit in the gallery or leave. Julian smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a sheep try to negotiate. Actually, Julian said, signaling to one of his bodyguards who stepped forward and handed him a thick, leather-bound dossier. I have quite a bit of standing. You see, Mr. Thorne, you just argued that Vantage Tech is failing. You argued that Mr. Vance is in debt. You argued that the company's liabilities outweigh its assets. That is correct, Silas said warily. Well, Julian opened the dossier. I am the primary holder of that debt. Gabe's head snapped up. What number my debt is with First National Bank and a private equity firm in Zurich. Titanium Holdings, Julian corrected. Based in Zurich, a private equity firm wholly owned by Sterling Global Industries. Julian slid a document across the table toward the judge. 6 months ago, Mr. Vance, when your company began to hemorrhage money due to your, let's call it, lifestyle spending, you took out a high-risk emergency bridge loan of $4 million from Titanium Holdings. You put up Vantage Tech's intellectual property and your personal estate as collateral. Julian paused, letting the words hang in the air. That loan, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, had a specific clause. Section 4, paragraph B. In the event of a material change in the borrower's financial stability or evidence of fraudulent financial reporting, the lender reserves the right to call the loan due immediately in full. Gabe laughed nervously. So I haven't defaulted. I've been making the interest payments. But you just committed perjury, Julian said, pointing to the court stenographer. 5 minutes ago you swore under oath to Judge Harrison that you are insolvent. You stated for the public record that you cannot afford $5,000 in alimony. That is a material change in financial stability. By your own admission, you are bankrupt. Julian turned to the judge. Your Honor, based on the defendant's sworn testimony regarding his poverty, Titanium Holdings is formally calling in the debt. We are demanding immediate repayment of the $4 million plus penalties. If Mr. Vance cannot pay, we are seizing the collateral, which includes his house, his car, his company, and... Julian glanced at Chloe. Whatever jewelry he bought his staff. You can't do that. Gabe screamed, jumping to his feet. This is a divorce court, not a corporate tribunal. It is a court of equity. Judge Harrison, said, his face hardening. The judge realized he had almost been duped into aiding a fraudster against the Sterling family. He looked at Gabe with disgust. Mr. Vance, sit down. Mr. Sterling, are you telling me that the assets Mr. Vance claimed were his are actually leveraged by your company? Correct, Your Honor, Julian said. In fact, technically, since he defaulted the moment he lied about his finances to you, I own the house he kicked my sister out of. Silas Thorne looked at his client. The lawyer closed his binder. Gabe, he whispered loudly enough for the mic to catch it. Is this true? Did you sign a collateral agreement with Titanium? I didn't know it was him. Gabe sputtered. It was just a shell company. It was supposed to be Anonymous Capital. Anonymous Capital. Camellia spoke up for the first time since Julian arrived. She remained seated, her voice calm and clear. Gabe, did you really think a Swiss private equity firm would lend $4 million to a failing tech startup without doing a background check? Did you really think they approved that loan just because you have a nice smile? She turned to him, her eyes sad but dry. I approved the loan, Gabe. The room went dead silent. What? Gabe whispered. I called Julian, Camellia said. Back in April, when you told me you were going to have to fire the engineering team because you gambled away the payroll account on crypto, I begged Julian to save the company. I told him to lend you the money through titanium so you wouldn't know it was me. I wanted to save your ego. She stood up slowly, picking up the cheap Amazon box she had brought with her, the only thing she had left the house with. I saved your company because I loved you, she said. And you used that money to buy a ring for her. She pointed at Chloe. Chloe instinctively covered the massive diamond on her left hand. Gabe stammered. He looked from Camellia to Julian to the judge. He was cornered, but his arrogance wouldn't let him die quietly. So what? So you tricked me into a loan. That's entrapment, Judge. This is a setup. No, Mr. Vance. Judge Harrison said, banging his gavel. This is consequences. Mr. Thorne, I am freezing all of your client's assets, effective immediately. There will be no lunch at Canlis. There will be no flight to Tuscany. We're not done, Your Honor, Julian interrupted. The debt is just the appetizer. We haven't even gotten to the embezzlement yet. If Part 4 was the strike, Part 5 was the dissection. Julian signaled to the back of the room again. 2 more people entered. They were dressed in grey suits carrying bankers' boxes. They weren't lawyers. They were forensic accountants from Deloitte, hired specifically by the Sterling Group. They set up a projector in the middle of the courtroom. Mr. Vance, Julian said, pacing the floor like a prosecuting attorney. You claimed earlier that Vance Global Solutions was a legitimate consulting vendor. You claimed you paid them $3 million for server optimization. A spreadsheet appeared on the projection screen. It was a complex web of transactions. This is the flow of money, Julian explained using a laser pointer. From Vantage Tech's operating account to Vance Global Solutions in Nevada to a bank in the Cayman Islands, and finally, back to a purchase account for a condo in Miami. Julian clicked a button. A photo of a luxury penthouse in South Beach appeared. Who lives in this condo? Gabe, Camellia asked. Gabe crossed his arms, refusing to answer. I'll answer, Julian said. The deed is in the name of Chloe Miller. The entire courtroom turned to look at Chloe. She was no longer looking at Gabe with adoration. She was looking at him with horror. You put it in my name, Chloe shrieked. You told me you were renting it. You told me it was a corporate apartment. Technically, Silas Thorne interjected, trying to save himself from disbarment. If Mr. Vance purchased real estate with company funds and placed it in the name of a third party to hide it from a divorce settlement that is problematic. It's not problematic, Silas, Julian corrected. It's a felony. It's wire fraud. It's tax evasion. And since Miss Miller here is the deed holder, she is an accessory to money laundering. Chloe jumped up. No way I didn't know. He told me to sign some papers for insurance. I didn't know it was stolen money. Sit down, Gabe barked at her. Shut up, Chloe. Don't tell me to shut up, Chloe yelled back, her face twisting. You told me she was broke. You told me she was a leech. You didn't tell me her brother was the goddamned CEO of Sterling Industries. I'm not going to jail for you. Gabe. Chloe looked at the judge. Your Honor, I want to testify. He made me sign everything he said he was hiding money, so the bitch wouldn't get it. Sorry, Mrs. Vance, but he said he was going to divorce her, and we'd live off the hidden cash. Judge Harrison looked at the court reporter. Are you getting all this? Every word, Your Honor. Gabe slumped in his chair. The facade was gone. The genius tech mogul was gone. All that was left was a greedy small man who had underestimated the quiet woman washing his dishes for 10 years. Camelia walked over to the witness stand where she had placed her evidence. She picked up a single piece of paper. "Gabe," she said softly, "there's one more thing." She held up the paper. "Do you recognize this?" Gabe squinted. It was an email printout. "It's an email you sent to your mystery buyer last week," Camelia said. "You've been trying to sell Vantage Tech behind my back before the divorce finalized, hoping to pocket the buyout cash and hide it." "So," Gabe grunted, "business is business. You were negotiating with a holding company called Nebula Ventures," Camelia said. "You offered to sell them the source code for your new AI algorithm for $10 million. You told them in this email that the code was solely yours and that your wife had no claim to it." "It is mine," Gabe insisted. "Actually," Camelia said, her voice turning hard. "Who wrote the initial code? Gabe, who stayed up for 3 nights straight in 2018, debugging the kernel when you were passed out drunk. Who wrote the patch that saved the launch?" Gabe stayed silent. "I did," Camelia said. "And because I did, and because we are married, and because there is no prenup, that code is marital property. But that's not the twist." She handed the email to the judge. "The twist, Gabe, is that Nebula Ventures doesn't exist. It's a honeypot." Gabe's eyes widened. "What? I created Nebula Ventures," Camelia said. "I was the one emailing you. I was the one you were negotiating with. You sent the source code, the most valuable asset of your company, to a Proton Mail account that I control. You literally gave me the company." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "You tried to sell your company to your wife, to hide the money from your wife, and in the process you gave her the evidence to put you in prison for corporate espionage and fraud." Julian leaned in close to Gabe. "You're not just broke, Gabe. You're obsolete." The hearing ended, not with a bang, but with the scratching of a pen. Judge Harrison didn't need to hear closing arguments. He issued an emergency summary judgment. "The court finds that Mr. Gabe Vance has engaged in systemic financial fraud, perjury, and dissipation of marital assets," Harrison ruled. "Therefore, I am awarding 100% of the marital estate to Mrs. Camelia Vance. This includes the home, the cars, the bank accounts, and full ownership of Vantage Tech." The gavel banged. "Furthermore," the judge added, looking over his spectacles, "I am referring the transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office for review regarding the charges of perjury and wire fraud. Bailiffs, please ensure Mr. Vance does not leave the building until the officers arrive." Gabe sat frozen. Camelia gathered her things. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. She picked up her Amazon box and turned to leave. "Camelia." Gabe scrambled up, ignoring the bailiff moving toward him. "Camelia, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Illy, please." Gabe's voice cracked. It was the voice he used when he was sick or when he was scared, the voice that used to make her heart melt. "You can't do this. Prison, I can't go to prison. I'm your husband." Camelia turned slowly. "You're not my husband, Gabe. You're a liability I just wrote off." "But what about us?" he pleaded, desperation leaking from his pores. 10 years, Camelia. We had good times. Remember the trip to Napa? Remember when we adopted the dog? You can't just destroy me." "I didn't destroy you," Camelia said calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights." She looked at Chloe, who was sobbing in the corner, talking to a police officer, likely cutting a deal. "And Gabe," Camelia added. "Yes." Hope flickered in his eyes. "You said I should leave with nothing," she said, gesturing to the grand courtroom, the lawyers and the waiting police officers. "Look around you. You are the one leaving with nothing." Camellia walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her. Outside in the hallway, the air was easier to breathe. Julian was waiting for her. He handed her a fresh coffee. "That went well," he noted dryly. "Is it over?" Camellia asked. "The divorce, yes," Julian said. "The criminal trial that's just starting. But that's not your problem anymore. I have a team of lawyers who will handle the transition of Vantage Tech. We'll rebrand it Fire the Board and integrate the tech into sterling. You just made the family about $50 million richer." Camellia took a sip of the coffee. It was hot, bitter, and grounding. "I don't care about the money, Julian." "I know," he said, putting an arm around her. "But it's a nice bonus. Now there's a car waiting outside. Not an Uber, a car. Mum is waiting in the Hamptons. She wants to see you." They walked toward the elevators. As the doors opened, they saw Silas Thorne, Gabe's lawyer, practically running for the stairs, trying to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of his client. Camellia stepped into the elevator. She looked at her reflection in the polished brass doors. She didn't look like the scared woman in the rain anymore. She looked like a Vance. No, she looked like a Sterling. "Julian," she said as the elevator descended. "Yeah. Make sure Chloe gets evited from the Miami condo by tonight." Julian grinned. "Already done. I had the locks changed while the judge was reading the verdict." "Good." The elevator dinged. They stepped out into the lobby of the courthouse. The press was there. Someone had tipped them off that the reclusive CEO of Sterling Industries was in town. Cameras flashed. "Ms. Sterling! Ms. Sterling!" a reporter shouted. "Is it true you just hostile takeovered your own husband in divorce court?" Camellia put on sunglasses despite the overcast Seattle sky. She looked at the camera. "No comment," she said. "But you can quote me on this. Always read the fine print." The fall from grace didn't happen in slow motion. It happened at terminal velocity. For Gabe Vance, the transition from the master of the universe to inmate 89402 or A was a blur of flashing cameras, aggressive handcuffs, and the humiliating stripping away of his identity. 1 minute he was wearing a $4,000 bespoke suit. The next he was shivering in a holding cell wearing orange scrubs that smelled of industrial bleach and another man's sweat. 6 months later, the reality had set in like concrete. The Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, was a gray, soulless purgatory. It was a place where time didn't flow. It dripped agonizingly slow, like a leaking faucet in the dark. Gabe sat on the edge of his bunk, his head in his hands. The morning count buzzer had just sounded a harsh, ear-splitting noise that rattled his teeth. "Up and at 'em, Vance!" A guard barked, banging a baton against the bars. "Kitchen duty. You're on grease traps today." Gabe didn't argue. The Gabe who would have threatened to sue the guard, the Gabe who would have demanded to speak to a manager, died somewhere between the indictment and the plea deal. He stood up, his joints aching from the thin mattress. He looked at his reflection in the polished steel mirror bolted to the wall. He looked 10 years older. His hair, once perfectly coiffed with imported clay, was thinning and grey. His skin was sallow. The predatory gleam in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted vacancy. He shuffled into the common room, joining the line for the cafeteria. The food was a tasteless sludge of carbohydrates, but he ate it. He had to. He had lost 20 pounds since the trial. "Hey, billionaire!" a voice sneered from the table behind him. It was Miller, a hulking man in for armed robbery, who had taken a perverse liking to tormenting the fallen tech mogul. "My cousin on the outside sent me a letter. Says your old lady is on TV again. Says she's looking real good." Gabe stared at his tray. "She's not my old lady Miller." "That's right." Miller laughed, spraying crumbs. "She's the boss. You're just the help that got fired." Gabe closed his eyes. He tried to block it out, but he couldn't block out the truth. He had signed the plea deal 5 years for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion because Silas Thorne had told him it was the only way to avoid 20. But the day after the sentencing, Silas had sued Gabe for $200,000 in unpaid legal fees. Gabe had nothing left to pay him with. The government had seized the accounts. Julian Sterling had seized the assets. And Camellia had seized the narrative. The betrayal of the accomplice. Later that afternoon, during his allotted 30 minutes of recreation time in the yard, Gabe sat alone on a concrete bench. The sky was the color of a bruised plum. He thought about Chloe. For the first month, he had waited for a letter. He had convinced himself that she was a victim too, that they were star-crossed lovers, separated by a cruel system. He fantasized that she was waiting for him, that she was hiding a stash of cash he hadn't told the lawyers about. Then came the visit from his public defender, a harried woman named Mrs. Gable, who smelled of stale coffee and pity. Chloe Miller accepted a deal with the district attorney this morning. Gabe, Mrs. Gable had told him through the plexiglass. "What deal?" Gabe had asked, pressing his hand against the glass. "She doesn't know anything. I protected her." "She gave them the hard drive," Mrs. Gable said softly. "The one you hid in the safe at the lake house. She testified that you coerced her into signing the deed for the Miami condo. She painted you as the mastermind and herself as the naive victim. In exchange for full immunity, she handed over your entire digital ledger." Gabe felt the blood drain from his face. She gave them the ledger. She's walking free, Gabe. She's currently living in Bellevue, working at a steakhouse. She's moving on. That was the moment Gabe Vance truly broke. It wasn't the prison sentence. It wasn't the loss of the money. It was the realization that his entire reality had been a construct of his own ego. He thought Camellia was the weak one, and Chloe was the prize. In the end, the prize had sold him out for a plea deal, and the weak one had checkmated him without raising her voice. The rise of the Phoenix. While Gabe was scrubbing grease traps in Oregon, Camellia Sterling was standing in a boardroom that hovered 50 stories above the streets of Seattle. The room was sleek, modern, and intimidating, much like the new CEO of Sterling Vantage AI. Camellia stood at the head of the massive oak table. Seated around her were 12 men and women, the new board of directors, a mix of Sterling Industries veterans and the few brilliant engineers from Vantage Tech that Camellia had saved from Gabe's purge. "The numbers for Q3 are in..." Camellia said, her voice crisp and authoritative. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. When a Sterling spoke, the room listened. She clicked a remote, and a graph appeared on the smart glass wall. The line shot upward at a 45-degree angle. "As you can see," Camellia continued, "since we stripped out the lifestyle spending of the previous administration, the private jets, the ghost consultants, the vanity marketing, our operating capital has stabilized. But more importantly, the release of the Vance Sterling Protocol has secured contracts with 3 major logistics firms in Europe." A hand went up. It was Mr. Henderson, a holdover investor who had been buddies with Gabe. He still looked at Camellia with a mixture of skepticism and patronizing doubt. "Camellia, darling," Henderson said, leaning back in his chair. "The numbers are pretty sure, but the market is worried about the vision. Gabe was the visionary. He was the face. You're very good at the bookkeeping, but can you really lead a tech giant? Do you understand the code deeply enough to innovate?" The room went silent. Julian, sitting at the far end of the table, covered his mouth to hide a smirk. He knew what was coming. Camellia didn't get angry. She didn't flush. She simply turned her gaze to Henderson. It was a gaze that could freeze helium. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly, "do you recall the infinite loop bug of 2019, the one that crashed our servers for 3 days and cost the company $2 million? Yes, vaguely," Henderson stammered. "Gabe said it was a Russian cyber attack." "It wasn't a cyber attack," Camellia corrected. "It was a syntax error in the kernel architecture. Gabe had written a redundancy script that fought with the primary database. I spent 72 hours awake, rewriting the entire backend in Python, while Gabe was at a golf tournament in Pebble Beach." She leaned forward, placing her palms on the table. "I didn't just fix the code, Mr. Henderson. I wrote the code. The vision you worshipped was my late-night homework. The face of this company was a mask that I painted. So to answer your question, yes, I understand the code. I am the code." Henderson swallowed hard, shrinking into his suit. Apologies, Miss Sterling. No further questions." "Good," Camellia said, straightening up. "Meeting adjourned. Julian, stay behind." As the board members filed out, looking suitably chastised, Julian walked up to his sister. He looked at the graph on the wall, then at her. "You terrified him," Julian laughed. "I think he actually stopped breathing for a minute." "He needed to be reminded," Camellia said, rubbing her temples. "They all think the same way Gabe did. They think power looks like a loud man in a suit. They don't realize power is quiet. Power is leverage." "Speaking of leverage," Julian said, reaching into his briefcase. "This arrived for you, from the prison." He slid a small grey envelope across the table. It had a stamp that read, "Censored. Inmate mail." Camellia looked at it. For a moment, her hand hesitated. "You don't have to open it," Julian said gently. "I can shred it. You'll never have to think about him again." Camellia picked up the envelope. "No, I want to read it." She tore it open. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky, a far cry from Gabe's usual bold, arrogant signature. "Camellia, I saw the Forbes cover. You look happy. Miller, my cellmate, asked me if I taught you everything you know. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that I made you. But I had a lot of time to think in the hole last week. And I realized something. You didn't pay off my first loan with your grandmother's money because you were stupid. You did it because you believed in me. You hid who you were, the sterling name, the money, the power, because you wanted to see if I could love you just for being Camellia. I failed that test every single day for 10 years. You told me to leave with nothing. I thought you were being cruel, but you were just giving me back exactly what I brought to the table. Congratulations on the acquisition. The code, the patch you wrote, it's brilliant. It always was." Camellia read the letter twice. She didn't cry. The tears had all been used up a long time ago, shed in the bathroom of that mansion, while Gabe screamed at her from the bedroom. She folded the letter and placed it in the center of the table. "Well," Julian asked, "what does he want, money an appeal?" "No," Camellia said, staring at the folded paper. "He just wanted to admit he was wrong. It's the first honest thing he's ever written." "Does it change anything?" Camellia walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The rain was falling over Seattle, but from this height she was above the clouds. The sun was shining here. "No," she said. "It changes nothing. But it's nice to know the ghost is finally gone." The High Castle. 3 weeks later, Camellia was in France. The Sterling family estate Château de Lumière sat nestled in the rolling hills of the Rhône Alps. It was a place of ancient stone and timeless silence, a world away from the glass and steel of the tech industry. Camellia sat in the garden, a sketchbook on her lap. For the first time in a decade, she was drawing again. Not architectural schematics, not financial projections, just art. She was sketching the way the light hit the vineyard. "You missed lunch," a voice called out. Camellia looked up. Her mother, Victoria Sterling, was walking down the stone path. Victoria was the matriarch of the family, a woman of steel and grace who had run the empire after Camelia's father died. She had been the one who warned Camellia about Gabe 10 years ago. She had never said, "I told you so," but her embrace when Camellia returned home had said everything. "I wasn't hungry." Camellia smiled. Victoria sat down on the bench beside her. "Julian tells me the stock price hit an all-time high yesterday. He says the investors are calling you the Iron Lady of Tech." Camellia chuckled. "I think they mean it as an insult." "Oh, it is," Victoria agreed, her eyes twinkling. "But you will wear it as armor. Just like I did." Victoria looked at her daughter. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Camelia's ear. "Are you happy, El Truly?" Camellia looked out at the horizon. She thought about the small apartment in South Seattle where she had plotted her revenge. She thought about the rain. She thought about the fear that used to live in her chest, a constant tightening knot. It was gone. "I'm not just happy, Mom," Camellia said. "I'm free. For 10 years I was playing a character. I was playing the good wife. Then I was playing the vengeful ex. Now I'm just Camellia." "And Gabe?" Victoria asked. Camellia picked up her charcoal pencil and added a shading line to her drawing. "Gabe was a lesson," Camellia said. "An expensive one, sure, but a necessary one. He taught me that my value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see it." Just then, Julian walked out onto the terrace, holding a bottle of vintage champagne. "I leave you two alone for 5 minutes and you're already philosophizing," he teased. "Come on, the helicopter is fueling up. We have to be in New York for the gala by tomorrow night." Camellia closed her sketchbook. She stood up, smoothing her dress. "New York," she mused. "Do you think the press will be there?" "Considering you're the woman who hostile takeovered her husband in divorce court?" Julian grinned. "Yeah, I think they'll be there." Camellia took her brother's arm. She took her mother's hand. "Good," Camellia said, a dangerous, beautiful smile spreading across her face. "I have a new acquisition to announce, and I want the world to hear it." She didn't look back at the chateau. She didn't look back at the past. She walked forward into the waiting sun, her family flanking her like royal guards. She was no longer the woman who left with nothing. She was the woman who had taken everything back and then built a kingdom on top of it. And that is the definition of the ultimate power move. Camellia didn't just win the divorce, she rewrote her entire destiny. Gabe thought he was discarding a nobody, but he ended up creating the very CEO who would overshadow him forever. It really goes to show, be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because they might just be the one holding it up. I have to ask, do you think Camellia should have visited Gabe one last time to gloat, or was her silence the ultimate revenge? And honestly, was the plea deal for Chloe fair, considering she helped bring him down? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of justice and redemption satisfied your soul, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist We post fresh stories every single day. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.